Okay, we're continuing with the book Hidden History of Health and Science by me, Pete Rogers. Ancient Roman first. We got to talk about some of the things that came out of ancient Rome. Here's a quote by Petronius, the patrician. He was the advisor to Nero. In the book Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz, one of the greatest novels of all time. He said, "The Greeks taught us poetry, the Romans taught us power, the Christians taught us forgiveness." The best thing about the Roman Empire is that it set up a way to spread Christianity quickly. Okay, ancient Roman first achievements. They had a few great writers. The greatest writer of all time, the greatest thinker of all time coming out of ancient Rome was Cicero. If you only study one Roman, study Cicero, because he connects you to the Roman Republic and then to the Roman Empire. He's the transitional figure, and he was the greatest orator, lawyer, speaker ever in the history of Rome, perhaps in the history of the world. And he wrote quite extensively, so his life is relatively well known. And he wrote a book on oratory, for example. He translated a bunch of Greek books into Latin. He was partially raised by Greeks, so he's a very knowledgeable, scholarly guy. Other great writers include Virgil. He wrote the Aeneid, the historians Livy and Tacitus, Horace, Juvenal, Ovid, Marcus Aurelius, for example. Okay, Epictetus as well, the Stoic. Anyways, they spread the Latin language throughout the known world of that time, and that sort of set the foundation for Europe and later for Christendom. It was a common language that all the scholars later in the Renaissance university system could communicate in Latin, and they could travel freely between the different universities. So Rome built the baseline from that, and the Romance language means they come from Rome, and that's things like, Italian, etc., French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. And English is considered a Germanic language, even though it's very heavily influenced by Latin. Okay, and the syntax in German is a lot like Latin, a lot of passive voice. Okay, construction of an extensive road system so they could manage all their territories, the Via Romaniae. Okay, let's see. Despite all that, they didn't have invention of a good saddle or a good stirrup. And here's a quote from the movie Life of Brian, spoken by the character played by John Cleese. He said, "Apart from better sanitation and education and irrigation and public health and roads and fresh water and public order, what have the Romans ever done for us?" They had a relatively modern, sophisticated legal system with the premise that a person was innocent until proven guilty and equality before the law. They didn't always follow that, but at least they had it, which was some progress. In general, though, the Romans were brutal barbarians in comparison with the ancient Greeks. And the ancient Greeks weren't a bunch of saints, but they were still head and shoulders above anything else in the ancient world. Okay, here's a painting of Cicero denouncing Catiline. This is the great Catiline conspiracy. Catiline tried to overthrow the government of Cicero. And again, Cicero was the greatest speaker. You can see how the painting's set up with Catiline as by himself, isolated, ostracized by the Senate. Cicero went too far, it is felt, in his persecution of Catiline and his co-conspirators, and this then led to a backlash against Cicero. These are very famous events in the history of Rome. Again, another spectacular painting, Cicero denouncing Catiline. If you want to read a great set of books about Roman history, I highly recommend the Cicero Trilogy by Robert Harris. It's great. If you want just a general introduction to the great Romans, then Rufus Fears, the historian, has the great history of that. There's other good places to learn about the Romans. The Cost of Glory YouTube channel by Alex Petkis is really good. Gregory Aldrich's a very good Roman historian as well. Okay, the Roman Republic was a form of government with representative rule, consuls, senators, and tribunes. USA founding fathers greatly admired it and imitated it. Okay, they were much more impressed by the Roman Republic, which had lasted 500 years, than they were by the Plato's Republic, which they felt was not very realistic. And then here's a quote by Cicero: "The Republic, when we inherited it, was like a beautiful painting whose colors were already fading with age. But our own time not only has neglected to freshen it by renewing the original colors, but has not even bothered to preserve its forms and outlines. What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth of Rome was firmly founded?" They had been what they have been so utterly buried in oblivion that not only are they no longer practiced, but they are forgotten. Yeah. Cicero is a major drama queen. I mean, he was a lawyer, so in order to win his case, he strongly felt that the most important thing was to stir up emotions in the crowd. So when you read the speeches of Cicero, the quotes of Cicero, you see this tremendous emotional rhetoric. You know, people who wanted to write well, they would imitate Cicero. He was magnificent. Okay, here's Cincinnatus, the great Roman, when he was called to defend Rome. Rome was in trouble, losing a war, and they went to the farmer Cincinnatus and said, please lead us. Cincinnatus led them to victory, and then he wanted to retire and go back to working in his fields. And GW for the USA was thought to be like the American Cincinnatus. The city of Cincinnati, of course, was named after him. Here's the construction of the aqueducts, Pont du Gard right there. Oops. The beautiful Roman aqueducts to get water to the city. They also made great sports arenas like the Colosseum. This is sort of like a tribute picture. There's the painting of the dying Gaul. Giovanni Panini, the Italian, did a lot of great paintings, you know. An obelisk-like column of victory, the Colosseum. Classical architecture like the Parthenon there. Lawrence Alma-Tadema from the 1800s was another great artist in painting ancient Greek and Roman scenes. The chariot races in the Colosseum were a big event. This one by William Trago. Reminds you of the movie Ben-Hur. Here's another Roman chariot entering Circus Maximus. Now, another important point that Edith Hamilton brought up, she's a great scholar, right, about the ancient Greeks and Romans, is that the Greeks played, they had fun, they had the Olympics, whereas the Romans were brutal. You know, the gladiators were not playing, they died, okay? Very often they died. Okay, great painting by the French artist Jean-Léon Gérôme. Okay, now here is Nero's fire in 64 AD when he burned down about 1/3 of Rome and he blamed it on the Christians. Okay, you know what? We're going to stop at this point on Rome. We'll do a little more Rome before we get into the regular science history stuff. I hope you found that helpful.